All right. Hey, welcome to REDCapCon 2023, day two and a half. So far, so good. Is everybody having fun?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was saying, aside from Boss, this is the best conference ever. Ouch. Okay. We're here today to talk a little bit about external modules. Let me start by introing those of us up here. So Chris, recently MVP to REDCap, a big contributor to external modules. Orca Search was a huge module that he made many years ago. That's been sort of an inspiration for people adding some really cool functionality on top of REDCap. Kyle here kind of runs Vanderbilt's professional services and is a big contributor to the external module framework. And then obviously Mark here is the man when it comes to the EM framework. This is the guy that's responsible for the vast majority of the foundation that all the stuff that people are building is based upon, and keeping it running and keeping it stable, keeping it secure, creating and enforcing best practices. And in fact, you can argue that the external module framework as a whole, because it's not that old, and because we've had a really good person at the helm, in some ways it's architected even better than REDCap itself, right? It has a lot of good features in there. I mean, it's like, hey, it's Windows 98, so REDCap's been around for a long time. That's a lot of legacy. It's a challenge. So anytime you can restart, you have an opportunity to improve, and I think the framework has done some of that. And then myself, been around doing this for a while too. So last year we gave a talk on external modules. It was more of a historical pass from the early days of modifying the source code to DETs and plugins and hooks, external modules, where they came from. And I think it was a pretty good talk in the slide deck. I just went back and looked at it and I was like, man, who made that deck? That's a good deck. And so rather than try to redo that, I'm just putting a link to it here. And if you didn't see it last year, or you just want more of a reference, it's a good deck. So go pull it up, look at it. If you're having trouble sleeping, it's all there. So does anybody remember that talk? They're like, wow. No, nobody remembers it. Okay, so I'm not doing much here. I'm just going to introduce Mark, who's going to kind of take the show and give us some examples. But we're just going to kind of go over thinking about, when do you use external modules? How do you frame a problem and approach a way to solve it? Go through a live coding demo, and hopefully the internet and everything works. And then at the end, we have a couple other pointers, time permitting, or we can do Q&A, whatever you guys as the audience prefer. So we'll keep it pretty loosey-goosey here. And now I'd like to hand it over to Mark.
Let's see. I don't think we have a mic stand. I'm going to try to yell. Can everybody hear me in the back? Ish. There might be a mic stand coming.
We can. Empty mug. There you go.
Oh,
Here we go. Gaff tape.
okay.
Look at that.
Oh, let's see. Okay, I think that'll work. How's that doing in the back? Fantastic. Okay. So my name's Mark, and I am going to show you how easy building a module can be. So I'm going to show you our latest documentation, which recently got a big update thanks to University of Florida primarily. And I am going to show you how to build your first module using the docs and kind of walk through in real time how I think about it once I know the tools. So let's start by just going to Control Center on your REDCap instance. So on the left-hand menu, you'll see a plugin, hook, and external module documentation link. If I click that, you'll notice we're still in REDCap, but there's another external module development link on the left here, and that will send you to our new public GitHub framework docs repo. So this is a public repo, which means anybody can contribute, and thank you. The external module framework has always been a community effort, so please, if you notice something in here that can be improved, please create an issue. Click the link here in GitHub for that, or create a pull request, fix it yourself. I would love to get help on keeping these docs up to date and complete, and covering multiple perspectives. So everyone should read these who wants to write a module. And you'll notice if you get started shortly in, there is the beginner's guide, which courtesy of Kyle Chesney at University of Florida. This is a great how-to for people that are brand new to module development. It covers REDCap in general, training videos, and then it gets you started on building your first module. But we're going to skip a bit since we've done this, or I've done this before, so I'm going to show you how easy this can be once you get the basics down. Let's say I've read all this. I'm going to scroll down to the Hello World example, and it looks like there's a basic module requirements page. Well, what is the simplest possible module I could build? Looks like to function, a module must have both a config.json and a PHP module class. So let's hop on my REDCap system, and I've got a modules folder here. Let's see, it should be showing my modules. There they are, okay. So let's make a new one called REDCapCon 2023 example. And because I like to use the command line a lot, I'm going to open it from here. Most people probably won't do that. That is my style. So I'm going to open this in my editor of choice called Visual Studio Code. And sorry, I had some files from my previous example, but I've just got an empty folder right now. So jumping back at my docs, it says I need a config.json. So I'm going to make a file called config.json. And again, I've read this before, so I'm going to pretend I know everything there is to know, which I don't, and copy paste in this example and see how quickly I can get a module going. So what do we want to call it? Let's call it REDCapCon 2023 example. For the namespace, this kind of keeps your modules separate so they don't conflict and interact with each other. I like to do institution name / my module, which is a pretty good standard for most people, I think. We'll do something like that. That's your standard PHP class name, which you, if you look at other modules, you'll notice some of these standards. Sure, that description works. Recent framework version, sure. And again, you don't have to know all these details. They're in the docs, but I'm going to run through it as quickly as possible to give you an idea of what is possible once you're more familiar with these details. So I'll plug my name in there and save that. And I think we're halfway done with building our basic module. So the next step mentioned here is a module class it said was required. So because I've done this a few times, I know my module class should match this name here at the end of the namespace. So I'm going to make a file with that name, .php. Let's again just copy paste in this example and see how quickly we can throw this together. So it's asking for a namespace again. I'm going to copy paste in. Oh, I didn't spell Vanderbilt right. Let's fix that. Bam. And I'm going to copy that namespace over to my PHP class. And because of a PHP quirk, I only need one / here versus 2. We won't talk about that. I'm going to copy paste my module class name down here, and I think I'm done. This, I think, is the most basic boilerplate you need to get a module going. And then from there, it's sort of up to you what you want to do with it. Your imagination is the limit. This is all you should need. So let's see if I did this correctly. If I go back to my REDCap instance to Control Center and scroll down in my left menu on the left, there's a Manage link. And if I click, this lists my enabled modules on my local REDCap system on my laptop. If I click Enable a module, let's see, I have a ton of modules here, but let's see if it can find the one I just built. And it looks like it can't, which probably means I did something wrong. Thank you, Gunter. So if I had read the docs, I would know that. That's what I get for skipping ahead. But let's rename this module to match all the other ones on my system and all the examples. Add a version number to the end, which REDCap requires primarily for the repo. And let's see if that fixes our problem. Enable a module. I'll search to get through my list, and there it is. So it found our version. I'm going to click Enable. No hooks yet. So I'm going to keep going, and I believe it will show up in my list. Again, I'll search for it. There it is. So I've got my brand new module enabled on a system. That is how easy it is to create a module once you get the basics down. So let's see, what do we want to do with this module? one of the most popular features that people have been talking about even pre the external module framework is hooks. How do I plug into something REDCap is doing already and customize it to do it my way? So let's jump back to our external module documentation. And I'm just going to jump back to the README. This is the page that we were sent to straight from REDCap. Again, you should read all this. I'm going to skip ahead, scroll down to this little index that shows all of our framework features here. And look at that. There's a page for hooks. Let's click that and see what we get. So I have read this before, so let's just copy paste this hook example it shows and see how quickly we can get that going. So if I copy paste this REDCap data entry form example and just pop over back to my module class and paste it in, then this should execute every time a REDCap data entry form is loaded. So let's go ahead and load a REDCap data entry form and see what happens. So if I go to my projects in REDCap, I have a test project I use for all kinds of things, so we'll jump there. And the first thing I have to do is, again, enable this module on the project level. So I'm going to click Manage next to External Project or External Modules in the left menu. Click Enable a Module again, and then I'm going to search for REDCapCon. There's my module. I now have it enabled on the project, and then I'm going to open a data entry form. So we'll click Add Edit Records. I'll go ahead and select one of my test records I already have sitting around and my first test form I've got here. So this should be executing our hook, but how do I know it's executing the hook? It's a good question. Let's put some kind of action in here to just verify what we're doing is actually causing some sort of action in REDCap. So there are many ways you can do this. One way to do it might just to be echo to echo something to the screen. So I'm going to say hello from our module. I think we need a semicolon, and then let's refresh our data entry form. And looks like it is not printing that. Let's try. I think we got that. I am going to try.
VS Code update to the new.
Yeah, it should. Yeah. Let's see. I'm going to try. Well, let's see. Is our module still enabled here? Yeah, it's there. So REDCap data entry form. Blah, hello from our module. Let me try something a little different. I'm going to pop. That's not what I meant. I'm going to pop out of PHP. I'm going to do a script tag, and I'm going to try to print something in JavaScript just out of curiosity. And I need to close the script tag. Thank you. Now if I go back to our data entry form and refresh, it does not work. Oh, I have to click it. Yeah, thank you. Well, no, that's not it either. I think that might be it.
Where's this part of your presentation?
Are there any versions in the room?
Presentation.
No. You're
Yes, thank you. You're spot on. Good job. So this is actually good troubleshooting practice. So we're going to, let's see. I'm going to reopen this folder from the command line since, yeah, exactly. I opened the wrong folder there. I'm going to reopen it under the new name, or I guess I can open both and copy it over. So that's a very good point. Thank you, Gunter. So it looks like, exactly, yeah, it had our old code in here from before we changed the version. So I'm going to paste in our hook code, and let's try this one more time. Let me collapse this a little so you can see more of the line. So let's say echo hello from our module.
This is a great reason to go one little step at a time, because if you do too much all at once and then it doesn't work, you don't know where to troubleshoot, and you can end up wasting a lot of time undoing stuff that's working perfectly well.
So let's refresh our page. Look at that. At the bottom of the data entry form, we get hello from our module. Yay! So that's fun and all. Actually, that's pretty exciting. We've made our first module in just a few minutes. We have what? 13 lines of code in one file and 14 in the other. That's not very many lines of code. So we've successfully plugged into REDCap and modified its behavior. We've displayed custom text in just a few lines. And that's cool and all, but let's try to do something a little more exciting. Let's see what other module features are out there that we might want to play with. So I'm going to jump back to my, my main README here in the module framework documentation and scroll down to our framework features index. Which one of these looks exciting? Let's see. Let's try the logging functionality. That could be pretty powerful. So we've got a little intro here with how the logs work, but I'm impatient. Let's try to just log something and see how far we get. I'm going to copy paste this first example and go back to our module class. We don't need our little hello message anymore. Instead, let's log data entry form loaded. Looks good. I don't really want to store the log ID, so I'll just get rid of that. And it looks like my editor is noticing this module class is not right. So this syntax is actually what is designed to work from pages. This is how you reference your module object from module pages. But as a PHP developer, I know that when I'm within a class, to access that class, I just use the keyword this. So that looks like it fixed that problem in our editor. Let's reload our page and see what happens. So back to my data entry form. If I refresh, it should have executed that code, but how do we know? Let's jump back to our docs. So I copied in the storing logs basic example here. Looks like right below that there's a viewing logs section. REDCap has a built-in view logs link in the left menu. Well, let's see if we can find that. If I scroll down here, might open this in a new tab. View logs. Look at that. Those are our data entry form message. Well, mine from earlier today and the one we just did at 2:16 right there. So that's pretty exciting. We logged a message, and I can imagine how we could log anything we want to for tracking over time and then maybe acting upon it. So what would happen if we wanted to act upon something in the logs? Well, first off, we might need a little more information. Data entry form loaded is just not that helpful. Let's say we want to store something along with that log. But it looks like this next example here shows some parameters being saved with a log message. Let's give that a shot. I'm just going to copy paste this parameter argument in here that it shows in the storing logs example. So let's paste that in here. I might edit the syntax a little bit to make it look the way I want. I don't really want two parameters. Let's just store one to start, and let's see. Looks like in our hook we have some variables getting passed in here automatically. Let's store what instrument we're loading. That might be a good example. So let's create a parameter to our log called instrument, if I can spell, and then paste in that instrument parameter coming into our hook when it's called. So if I refresh, not this, if I refresh our data entry form, that should execute the hook again. And then if I go back to our view logs page, I can see at minute 18 we get another log message, but we don't have our parameter here. This is sort of a basic page. If you want to do something more advanced, you probably have to use the query logs method, which is next in our docs. So this looks a little more powerful. It looks like a SQL query. I can select basic parameters I want. I can add a where clause if I only want to find certain messages. So let's see if we can utilize this example. But where am I going to put it? Maybe I should check my other module features. If I jump back to my README, look at that. The very first framework feature is modules can provide their own pages to perform arbitrary actions. That might be useful in this case, so I'm going to click that example. Blah-de-blah. I'm getting impatient. I'm going to skip that. Looks like left-hand menu links. That might be a good place because I don't want to manually type a URL to any pages. Let's copy this link example to create a link to a new page. So it says add this to config.json. I'm just going to copy paste this and paste it into our config.json and see how far we get. So I go back to my code, config.json, paste in this link section. Looks like we have a control center link and a project link. I don't know if I want a control center link. Let's just get rid of that. Project link sounds nice. let's call it my log viewer. Should work pretty well. Sure, that icon looks good for now. For the URL, let's go to my log viewer page. Because I've done this a few times and read the docs, I do know that means I need to create a page in my module by this same name. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file in my module called mylogviewer.php to match that link. And then inside here, I'm just going to say, this is my log page. So let's save that, jump back to REDCap, and refresh the page. Now you'll notice in the external module section on the left, there is a My Log Viewer link. Look at that. If I click that, we get our output from the page. So I just made my first module page. That's pretty exciting. So if I jump back to my logging documentation to kind of pick up where we left off, we're looking at the logging functionality in the framework. So I'll go back there. Looks like we've got an advanced example here of how to query based on certain parameters from the log. So let's copy paste that and see if we can make it work. I don't know if I got it. Okay, so I don't need my log message anymore in the log viewer page. I'm going to get rid of that. Paste in my example from the docs. So what do we want to select? Sure, timestamp, username, that sounds great. I'd also like to know the instrument that I stored along with it, so we'll add that. The message as well, sure, that would be nice to see. And I probably should keep this where clause because I don't want everything that's ever been logged from my module. I could have different log messages eventually. We probably just want this one message. So if you've read the documentation on querying in the framework, you'll know this question mark is a parameter that's then going to be replaced by this string here, the parameters that's passed into the query method later on. So to do that, we probably want to use the same string that we use to log data over here. And I don't really want to copy paste that because that might get hard to manage if I ever need to change it or reference it going forward. Let's extract that to a shared location. So I'm gonna pull that string out of there, and I'm gonna make a constant in my class called my log message. And then I'm just gonna paste in the string I was using before, and then use this constant in place of it here. And then that should let me in my log viewer page use that as our parameter to only find the logs that match that message. I think that's looking pretty good. We've got some red lines. Let's see what our editor is trying to tell us here. So this is just an example with the dots. So really we should do something with our logs once they come back from the database. So I use var dump a lot in PHP. That's pretty common when you look at examples on the internet. So let's just dump the row to the screen and see what we get. Looks like it fixed that error. Now we're getting a red line here. So I wonder why that is. Well, namespaces are pretty important in modules. They exist to prevent conflicts like I mentioned earlier, but that also means that anything I define in that namespace is only accessible in my module's namespace. So that also means that any other files in my module need to be under that same namespace in order to access things that I define in those classes. So I'm going to copy paste my namespace into this separate file, and look at that, the line went away. So I think our editor's happy. I'm going to refresh the page and see what we get. So I'll jump back to REDCap. Here's my log message from before, but let's refresh. Look at that. We get a bunch of gobbledygook back from the database. I don't like the way that looks. Let's clean that up a little bit. So there are a lot of ways you can do this. Just to show you a very basic example, I'm going to use the HTML pre-tag, which will preserve new lines and things that normally get stripped when you dump raw data to the screen for debugging. So I think that will give me a little better look here. Let's see what happens. Refresh. Look at that. We get a nice array for each of our log entries in the database. We've got our timestamp, we've got our username, we've got our instrument logged for the later logs, and our message. So we just successfully created a module, created a hook, logged custom data within that hook, created a page, and then queried the data we just logged back from the page. So now we can do anything we want with this data. We could display it in a nice pretty table. We could change module behavior based on it. We really have a lot of options there. So let's say I finish this module and I'm ready to submit it to the repo because I'm really excited about it. I want to share it with other people. When you go to the submission page on the repo, one of the first things it says is to run a security scan on your module. And I do appreciate people at least trying to run these security scans locally because it saves me time. So if you go to the submission survey, it will tell you to go to the control center. And I am going to bring that up real quick. Control center, external modules manage page again.
I forgot there's a scan within the control center.
You'll notice that in this intro on the modules page, there's also a developer tools section with module security scanning at the top. If I click that, it will give me a quick example of how to run the scan tool on my system. I happen to be running Windows subsystem within Linux, so I'm getting a Linux path here. If you're on Mac, it should make sense. If you're on Windows, you'll get a Windows path. It should work on your system. So it says, okay, under whatever my REDCap root directory is, there's a bin directory and a scan script. So I run that, and then I specify the path to my module. So let's give it a shot. If I jump back to my command line, so I might just type out the full paths here to make it super clear what I'm doing. So I've got my REDCap root directory, which happens to be in my home directory on my system. It set a bin directory under there, and then the scan script, and then it says to specify the path to my module, which will be just what we have above that I used for my editor. So there we go. That's looking good. I'm going to hit enter. And this will take about 15 seconds on my system. I know a lot of people run this within Docker, which is going to be quite a bit slower. If you do it a lot, I would recommend setting up a normal command line environment that's a little faster and more efficient. Look at that. We got some feedback back. So what's going on here? Under the hood, this tool uses multiple open source tools to try to get the most out of available security scanning options that are mature out there in the internet. And the big one there is Psalm. So you'll notice even if you don't know anything about what this output means, the first thing here, one of the first things here, is a link to psalm.com or psalm.dev that describes more about what this specific security error means. So let's check that out. So I'm just going to copy paste that URL, not that. Bam. And look at that. We get tainted HTML, a little description of what it is, some details on the security risks that could be caused by a vulnerability like this, an example of how it could be created, and some ways to mitigate it. That's very helpful. And I would recommend that everybody really dig into these details if you encounter security issues in your modules, or really before. You should be thinking about security with most things that you do. But let's say I've already read that. I have a decent understanding of it. The scan tool bundled with REDCap tries to give you some suggestions on how to fix this error. So it talks about wrapping it in HTML special cars to prevent this tainted HTML from causing a cross-site scripting vulnerability, for example. But that might be a little odd in my case because I don't have a simple variable like it talks about here. I'm actually passing in an array. So what else does it say? Let's see. Since REDCap 13.1.2, there's a module escape function. Let's see what that does. I'm going to jump back to my docs. So if I go back to my module documentation here, again, I'm going to start from the home page where REDCap sends you. Scroll down to my features, and the third link is module methods here. So if I click that, I get a huge list of all of the available methods that are bundled with module objects, and I'm just going to search for the word escape to find that escape function that was mentioned. And it looks like it says it ensures the given value is safe for display in HTML, so I think that's what we want in this case. It also says arrays are walked, and I happen to be printing an array right now, so it would be great if it automatically dug into the array and escaped all of its contents for me. So this sounds like exactly what I need. Let's give it a shot. So I'm going to jump back over here to my row, and I'm just going to call module escape like it showed in the output. That's looking good. And then I'm going to run the scan again to see what it comes back with. While this runs, I'm going to make sure that I did that change correctly and it didn't break anything. So if I go back to my page, and normally you would probably display this in a prettier format, but we don't have time to do that right now. So I'll refresh and just make sure, looks like it's still working, still displaying the data, so it looks like my escape method didn't actually change behavior, which is exactly what I want. So that's good. And then if I run back to my scan output, it says the scan completed successfully. So I just created a module, created a log, put it in a hook, created a page, displayed my data, introduced a security issue, and fixed it in just a few minutes. So that is how quick module development can be once you have a basic understanding. And tonight we'll be going over more of that at the 7 p.m. after hours coding session. So please join us if you want to get into more details or if you have any specific questions. I think that's all I've got. Did you want to pick up? Yeah.
So,
Some additional slides.
I think Andy had a couple more slides here, so I'll pull this back up.
15 minutes.
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really great. Thank you very much, Mark. Really easy to follow. We should all read the docs more often. Because I still learn stuff all the time from digging around in there. So let's see here. What else do we put? Another source is to look at other people's external modules. Sometimes sources of what to do and sometimes sources of what not to do. So, buyer beware, a lot of stuff is out there, but we encourage, at least at our institution, I tell anybody that's doing this, I really want you to make your repos public. Start public, never check in any keys. That's just a good practice. If you know that every commit is public, it adds this level of not doing anything stupid. But you can search. So we started adding these things called GitHub topics. And a topic is a way of tagging a repository. So if the repository is public and you tag it with tags, you can then query it. So here I did a query for REDCap external module, and it pulls up 285 modules that are on GitHub right now that you can go and look at and clone and fork and play around with. And so it's a great way to do this. And we talked a little bit about this in the talk last year about some good naming conventions on your local system. So it's like Luke will have a plugin that I want to run, an EM. I will typically fork it first on my local box. I'll play around with it, look at the code, make sure I understand it, decide whether or not I want my institution to support this. If I do, then I typically try to use the version of code that's been released to the repository, because I just want to be on the repository. But sometimes there's a tweak that I want to make or something else. So I can use my fork, I can switch to that version, I can deploy that locally, I can make a pull request back over to Luke and say, hey, would you mind adding this little fix? And he'll eventually do it. If it's me, you'll have to wait like 2 years. If it's somebody else, it might happen in a few weeks. And then once that happens, they release a new version. Then I switch my local instance back from my fork back to the version that was officially released from the repository. So it's a great flow to get in the habit of doing. And it makes the code better for everyone because that little fix or that little change is now available to everyone else in the consortium. So there are 3 tags. REDCap, which means it's REDCap related. REDCap external module is an external module. And then we ask, and I believe Mark enforces, that upon submission of a EM to the REDCap repository, it must also be tagged with REDCap-repo. So if you search for REDCap repo, you will see basically the same thing as what's being displayed on the REDCap repository. I hope that makes sense. There is more external module content at REDCapCon 2023. So here are a few more sessions that are available. So tonight, 7 to 9, there's going to be more EM coding. And then tomorrow, we've got in the morning, in the late morning, and in the early afternoon, some more examples of EMs. So soak it up. Everyone recognize The Simpsons. This is like my favorite. He gets, sent down and Satan forces him donuts. And he just says more. And Satan gets so frustrated that he can't make them too full. Okay, so let's take a break here. Not leave, but open up for questions. And if we still have time, we can go over a few other practices and a few other suggestions, but I want to make sure we have time for questions first. So.
Reminded me that my talk is at 8:30 in the morning.
Anyone? Yes.
So I have a custom suggesting when you guys approve it, it will be confident. When we approve it, is that the process where we submit a PR or we just submit?
You'd like to introduce a new hook, is that correct? Yes, so REDCap has a number of hooks, and those hooks are all documented in the documentation page that was there. These are the opportunities for you within the REDCap source code to potentially inject or modify REDCap's behavior. And Rob has been very receptive to additional hooks as needed. So some of the hooks are redundant, like there's kind of a generic hook, like every page top. But then you have to be careful. You have to really make sure you're only injecting where you want to inject the code. So if possible, it's good to start with the most specific hook that you can. And if that doesn't work, sometimes you have to step back and do other ones. But yeah, they're open. So I would recommend if you have a compelling reason for a new hook, there's very little harm to be done by putting it in the code and opening up that for developers. So I think a consortium feed. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we just recently, I don't know if you've even seen this, Andy, this was just a few weeks ago, added proposing new hooks to the module documentation. So that same hooks page that we copied our example from has a section at the bottom. If you want a new hook, this is how you propose it, and we'd love to help you get that in place because I'm sure it will help other people too.
Well, like I said, read the docs. Yep.
Yeah, so the repo is great if it's got some great modules. Sometimes some of them look like they're very active, they've been updated recently, then sometimes, maybe they haven't been updated in a few years. Some of that I don't know, is this gonna work or is it not gonna work? Is it gonna have a PHP conflict, something, is it outdated? Is there any, way of telling?
Module
or
stats.
just kind of, click and install and run on your own risk?
Yeah, so on the module repository itself, either you can get to the URL, if you just find the URL and you can just bookmark it like I do, or you can get to it through REDCap when you want to enable a new module, download it from the repository. On that page, when you're searching like Orca Search or Shazam, there's a stats. And if you click that stats, you can see all the institutions that are currently using that module and the versions of PHP, and there might, I can't remember, there's been a lot of updates to that over time, but it's got a fantastic list, and it even breaks it down into various groups for you to be able to try to peel apart everything that module's been using.
Oh, wow. Oh,
Sorry for my voice, the baseball game got me last night.
Thanks for
So I don't know.
But I would also add that anytime you use an external module, you're taking on risk. And if you're going to be pushing the frontiers with, you want to be the first one to be on PHP 8.3 whenever it comes, or you're probably going to run into some stuff that's going to break. Because we're all busy and we're doing our best to contribute. But I know that I'm guilty of sometimes missing a pull request, or it'll sit there and languish. So use the community site, make sure to bring it up and test. If it's critical to a project, test. I think as a general philosophy, most of our users understand that REDCap is dynamic and things may break every once in a while. But as has been mentioned a few times at the conference, there's kind of this trend. It's such a vital tool in the blurring lines between research and clinical applications for tools like REDCap. Make those kinds of failures harder to accept for some of your user community. So this is just a balance that we have to reach. We need to strive to be more complete. And it's also hard as a developer because, you've got different PHP versions, and how much am I going to test before I push this out there? Am I really going to have on my local instance a PHP 7.2, a 7.3, an 8, an 8.1, 8.2, test everything and make sure it's all working? The answer is no for all of my modules. I don't know if it's yes for anyone. So there is some buyer beware out there. It's not the same as the REDCap source.
There's a question or request around when there are new versions of the framework released. Is it a deliberate decision not to specify that in the change log? The change log message usually just says updates to the framework.
Yeah.
Maybe the answer is just read the docs more, right? But to know when those new versions are coming out, and so perhaps we can see on the changelog page when a new version of the framework has become available.
That's a good point. There's no reason not to include them there, so I'll try to make a note of that. In general, the framework versions are only for backward incompatibilities, so generally new features are still available in old framework versions. So updating super often is not critical, but getting years out of date is a little more critical if there are security or stability related changes in some of those
Yeah, it's more just
yeah.
like when I'm not on the latest version, we only update every few months, or maybe the sort of LTS versions, to choose what framework to use for a new module. It needs to be not too recent.
Yeah.
My versions.
And there are when you submit a module, there are recommendations on the framework version if it's not in a range that makes sense according to the repo.
Isn't there something in the doc showing what version each framework version is available on?
Yes, yeah, and the docs also show you. Well, the recommendation in the submission page on the framework, or I'm sorry, on the repo is probably the easiest guide because it'll show you exactly what's going on with your module. But in the documentation, there's also details on framework versioning, which give you a nice table of when each version became available. When you can sunset old versions is probably where this comes into play.
Is it also recommended for every institution to have like a development environment and a production server to have it separated? Because some of us, we just choose to go hub, not totally two hub, but in between. Like PHP version 7.4 is recommended. My issue which I had as regard the imaging on the PDF which I show you on Sunday, it's possible because I'm running at 8.1. So it could be that the Vanderbilt yet to test the 8.1 on the one of the issues which I'm having, thinking that it's general, probably it's not general, but actually I have no problem with the PDF rendering on the for those report form which I'm building. So maybe we should be looking at the development server and also production server, so that when the Vanderbilt is testing their own at the 7.4, you also test it at 7.4. So you don't go too high, and the exponent you have seen when you are going high, when the others have get to see it.
So yeah, so the question was just on whether you should have a development environment separate from a production environment for testing and all that. And I would just say, honestly, we should have more different environments for our setup because we have a test server and a production server, and the test server gets hit with a new version of REDCap, and we can do some testing on some of our modules there to see if the new version is going to break anything. But we run into issues even with that where, we're also doing project changes on that test environment, and before we push those to REDCap to the production. And honestly, there's definitely a case for you should always have a environment that is like a clone of your production environment, but running whatever new test you're trying to change, whether it's new version of a module that you want to test, new version of REDCap that you want to test. Definitely having multiple environments that you can test that in that's not going to break your production, it is always going to be valuable. I know it's hard to find resources to support all of that, but honestly, just having a lot of having different ways to test these things in a way that's as close as possible to production before you bring down the production server is always good.
It's time for a couple more. Anyone has any?
Any more questions? Yeah, I don't think you should be running external modules if you don't have a test environment. I think it's that simple. Because if you have important studies with running on there, you shouldn't be using other people's code without it. Yeah, go ahead, Luke.
It's a slide I've got in a presentation I've given at other conferences, but I have a sort of sliding scale of risk, if you like. So I look at what a module does, and if it's just displaying something on the screen, if it's just displaying something on the screen or injecting a little bit of JavaScript that tweaks the color of the button or something simple like that, really low risk, give it a quick go in the test environment, pretty safe. And then you go from there to, looking at, is it accessing data using the built-in get data method? It's pretty good. Is it saving data using the built-in method? Is it reading data using custom queries, and so check that it's got all of the right ways of calling the query methods and so on? Is it actually writing, right at the top end, is it actually writing data to tables using its own custom queries? Excuse me. and that's where it's a really much higher risk kind of module. So taking a look at the code, thinking about what it does and how it's working can really help with that sort of risk assessment. Where do you want to go with the module? How widely do you want to make it available?
Have you shared this? Is this shared?
Maybe I'll-
This scale?
Maybe I'll try and get along to come next year.
Is that-
I should have it somewhere. So, yeah.
Okay.
Any last questions? Otherwise, I think everyone is going to be heading out to the poster session. Appreciate everyone's time. Thank you, Mark, for the presentation.